It is so great to be with you all today. This afternoon has just already been very thrilling and inspiring. And one of the things, two great lines already that I've tweeted out because I've been following directions and been using the hashtag. One was Dr. Hrabowski's litany about how our thoughts become our actions become our habits become our character becomes our destiny. And the other actually was what Martine just said a moment ago, this great line, when he said, "I am partisan for democracy," which I think is actually it ought to be a t-shirt actually, it comes out of this conference. You can get all the proceeds for the t-shirt, Martine. But I think one of the things that we are gathered here today to recognize is not just the enduring meaningfulness of this work and the necessity of this work of teaching civic engagement and practicing all forms of civic learning, but it is recognizing the extraordinary moment that we're in right now. Stephanie alluded to it in her opening remarks. When I got off the train at the train station here in Baltimore, I got to the taxi line, and there was a whole line of taxis, every one of them with their windows down and with the radio up, listening to the testimony in the United States Senate today. And that was remarkable and kind of a notable thing. B, it reminded me of something I once read in an essay that the writer-novelist Saul Bellow once described. He was recounting a childhood scene growing up in Chicago where he was walking along Lake Michigan one summer afternoon. And he just noticed as he walked down the lake, there were all these parked cars, one after another. And in each of these parked cars were people sitting inside with the windows down, doors open, and all of them were listening to the radio to the same thing, to FDR's fireside chat. And as he walked past, he kind of got this Doppler effect fireside chat just going through there. And there's a long distance between FDR's fireside chats and James Comey's testimony today. But what ties them together is the fact that both of them require, among all of us, wherever we're coming from, some basic literacy in power, some basic understanding of how this republic is supposed to work. And I think it is in some ways heartening that today you had all those cabs lined up there with their windows down, that you had people not just in the Beltway, but all over this country wanting to tune in, wanting to get a sense of this emerging story as it takes shape. And I think what's heartening about it actually is this, that for all of the upheaval in our politics right now, and for all the ways in which, quite frankly, foundational institutions of our republic have been under assault, for all of the things that there are to worry about right now, we are also in the midst of the greatest surge of civic engagement and civic participation that this country has seen in half a century. And that is a remarkable thing, and a thing for us to be both mindful of, but also actively flowing into, taking part of, participating in. That surge is not just of the left. It's not just people coming under the hashtag resistance and going to protest marches, though it certainly is that. It's also folks like Jane was describing, millennial conservatives, libertarians especially, who see in this moment right now an incredible opportunity to break the box of a two-party duopoly, to break the frame of a left-right way of talking and thinking about politics. It's among reform conservatives who were probably in some ways cheered today by the reassertion of Congress and the reestablishment of Article 1 of the Constitution as a co-equal branch, but also as the first article in the Constitution. Those reform conservatives who had, for 8 years prior, been concerned about executive overreach are still concerned about executive overreach. And so there are folks across the left and the right today who are reawakened, who are engaging in new ways. And that's just people who already began with some measure of literacy and understanding of not just the Constitution, but how our whole system works. If you think more broadly about the great mass of Americans, what is exciting about this moment, and you're seeing it on your campuses, you're seeing it in your communities, what is exciting about this moment is that millions of people who for years have been completely out of the game, on the sidelines, mere spectators, have decided to get back on the field. And so one of my colleagues, Rebecca Burgess, who works at the American Enterprise Institute, has called this moment, post-election, particularly post the election of Donald Trump, a civic Sputnik moment. And in just the way that actually 60 years ago exactly, the Russians caused the United States to appreciate the fragility of our systems and to appreciate the ways in which we should not take for granted anything that we thought was strong and great and vital about our institutions. That happened 60 years ago when Sputnik went up into the sky and people in the United States realized, holy cow, we got a lot of catching up to do in this country in teaching science, in understanding technology, in making sure that the United States could keep up in what had begun then a space race. Well, today, amidst constitutional and civic crises in Washington and beyond, we face a civic Sputnik moment where people are waking up and realizing, holy cow, we are similarly in a period of peril. And holy cow, we, particularly those of us who either by profession or by avocation consider ourselves educators, we have a signal responsibility in this moment right now. Just as folks 60 years ago had to start teaching science, we have a signal responsibility to double down on teaching civics. So what does it mean when I say teach civics and teach citizenship? Well, I want to say in the first place that when I'm talking about citizens and citizenship, I want to define my term here. I'm not talking about documentation status under the immigration and naturalization laws of the United States. I think, and in the same ways, I actually quite appreciated the way that we opened this afternoon, not only with a rhetorical recognition, but actually a visual recognition of the native tribes on whose land we gather, and whose heritage we are now connected to simply by being present in this room together today. So when I talk citizenship, I mean a deeper, broader sense that's beyond documentation, a sense of, an ethical sense of being a member of the body, a pro-social contributor to community. Someone who recognizes by their values and their ethics and their behavior as well, that at the end of the day, there's really no such thing as someone else's problem. What I'm talking about, in short, is a non-sociopath. That's my definition of citizen. And so I actually have since we are a room full of people in educational institutions, I will offer you now a completely, admittedly, pseudoscientific sounding equation that I can use to talk about citizenship, which goes like this. P plus CH equals CI. P plus CH equals CI. And what that formula means is this: power plus character equals citizenship. And I want to unpack each of the component parts of this equation for a moment here. Power. What do I mean by power? I mean simply a capacity to ensure that others do as you would like them to do. And if some of you feel a little bit creeped out by that, if some of you are a little squeamish about someone being so direct and blunt about that, then as I've said many times before, I earnestly ask you, invite you, plead with you to get over it. And I'm not being glib. I know that for those of you who work in educational institutions and have many bosses and many masters and many people who are looking over your shoulder about what you're doing, that it can feel scary to name power so explicitly and to talk about power and to teach power. But when I say get over it, I mean get over it because this is the stuff of our day right now. That in any day, it is the case that those who understand power are willing to name it and anatomize it and become fluent in it, are very happy to have the great mass of people put their heads in the sand, turn the channel, look away, not pay attention. They're very happy to hoard knowledge of how power operates. But this is a moment today in our country, and I'm not just talking about what's going on a few dozen miles south of us right now. I'm talking about what's going on across this broad land right now. This is a time where we are called to become fluent again in the exercise of power at the local level, at the community level, at the campus level. And what does that mean? I've used this word fluency and literacy several times now. I mean literally, can you read power and can you write power? Can you read the various sources of power, whether it's money power, people power, ideas power, social norms power, state action power, the power of violence or force? Can you then map the conduits through which all those various sources of power are flowing? Organizations, institutions, narratives, networks. When you map those sources and those conduits together, you get what we colloquially call the power structure. But most people just stop at the colloquialism. They don't think about what that actually means. The power structure over there. They shorthand the power structure as they. They decided that fill in the blank. They decided that water rights ought to be allocated this way. They decided that tuition ought to go up this much. They decided that these bus lines ought to be cut or expanded. The power structure, right? And so being literate means, in the first place, being able to read that map of sources and conduits. But then in the second place, to be able to write yourself into it and to rewrite that map. And understand all the ways in which, as a law of nature, as a law of civic and human nature, power compounds, power justifies itself at all times. But what saves us is the third and most fundamental fact of power in civic life, which is that power is infinite. That it is possible for us to generate brand new power in civic life where it did not exist previously, simply through the magic act of organizing. Inviting one other human to engage in a common endeavor toward a common goal where we've got to figure out common strategies and negotiate in just the ways that Martine was describing there, to deliberate on competing values and competing priorities. To be able to do that is not just a matter of practice of deliberative democracy. To do that is the beginning of organizing, the beginning of generating power out of thin air, where it did not previously exist. And again, I know some of you are thinking, on the one hand, yes, this is a lot of what we do on our campuses in teaching democratic practice and teaching civic engagement, but Eric, can you just not call it power? Can you just kind of talk about it in a different way that might not get me in trouble with this person or this regent or this trustee or whatever? No. I'm not going to rename it. I insist that you grab hold of this language. I insist that you do it in a way that is completely democratically open to all. On many campuses around the country right now, we are seeing a surge of bottom-up civic power coming from the right, as Jane was describing. Activists demanding free speech, activists demanding inclusion and tolerance for disfavored conservative and libertarian views. That's power. That's power in action. Is it uncomfortable? Yes. Is it creating controversies that you'd rather avoid, perhaps? Sure. Is it life in a democracy? 100% yes. And our obligation as practitioners, but certainly our obligation as educators, is to get ourselves and all those around us more comfortable with the idea of practicing power in this self-conscious and self-aware way. But that's only part of the equation I laid out, right? And there are, by the way, many organizations that are represented in this room that are teaching the practice of power in a very innovative way, in a participatory way, in a hands-on way. But even as they do that, that's only the first part of the equation. The second part of the equation is character. Because if all you have is fluency and power, if all you know is how to get what you want, if all you are able to do is to manipulate systems and read power structures and re-rig rigged games, but you are completely untethered from any moral sense, you are completely cut off or disconnected from any deeper notion of shared values, well, then you are not really a citizen, you are a menace to the republic. Conversely, if all you are is fluent in character and have a very deeply thought out ethical sense and a really fully articulated moral vocabulary and understand in fine detail your competing values, but you have no idea how to get anything done in the world, you have no idea how to move people, how to move institutions, how to move money, how to move ideas, then you are enjoying yourself. without particularly serving anybody else. You're indulging yourself. And so this combination of power plus character, and when I say character, I'm not talking about just individual virtues of the kind that often get celebrated in a character education movement. I'm not talking only about honesty or perseverance or diligence. All those things matter. I am talking about what can be called character in the collective. How we live together. How we decide together. And that's not just a matter of process. What precedes the process there is, again, a mindset of mutuality, a mindset that life in a community is not a scorched earth, winner-take-all game in which the result hoped for is me wiping you off the face of the earth. That civic life in a democracy is a game of infinite repeat play. And if you're in a game of infinite repeat play, you learn eventually not to be a jerk. Because what goes around comes around. If you're in a game of infinite repeat play, you learn eventually to cultivate these ethics of reciprocity and mutuality and a sharing of responsibility and a taking of responsibility. Right? That's what I mean when I talk about character in the collective. At Citizen University, the nonprofit that I run, we do a lot of work on both sides of this equation, on trying to democratize understanding of how power works, working with great institutions all around the country who are doing this in classrooms, large and small, K-12 and higher ed, groups like the Mikvah Challenge and Generation Citizen that are part of a movement afoot in this country called Action Civics, that are really trying to teach civics, particularly in the K-12 system, not by describing how a bill becomes a law, but by actually thrusting students out of the classroom and having them go make a bill that becomes a law. Having students on campuses all over the country have to begin with the operating question of all power in civic life, which is who decides? Start with that question and then work backwards from it. If you figure out who decides, then you got to figure out who you've got to move in order to move who decides. And so our work at Citizen University is focused a great deal on trying to democratize understanding of how you do this and how these things work at scales both local and national in cities around the country. We partner with organizations like Mikvah and Generation Citizen. We partner with organizations as well that are all around the country right now doing a movement, part of a movement called Participatory Budgeting, which is another great instantiation of people practicing power in a hands-on way. Students, neighbors, activists, in college towns and all over the place. And participatory budgeting is as simple as it sounds. It's city governments deciding to set aside a chunk of the municipal budget and saying to young people, in the case of some cities like Seattle, where I'm from, saying to young people, here's $1 million from our budget that was allocated for youth programming. You all decide how to spend it. Which puts the both burden and the blessing on this group of young people to have to figure it out, to have to take responsibility, to have to practice power, right? And so we work with groups like that all around the country on the side of power. But on the side of character, too, we also have partners of all kinds. And Jen mentioned a program that I run at the Aspen Institute on citizenship and American identity. One of our great partners is an organization that I bet many of you have either heard of or indeed work with on your campuses and in your community. It's called Facing History and Ourselves. An organization that started out 40 years ago as a Holocaust education program, but has now expanded into teaching, broadly I would describe it as teaching a moral sense to students, using moments of history, using kind of pivot points in history. Yes, the Holocaust, but also the United States Civil Rights Movement, also the anti-apartheid movement. Using that material, those texts, both literally and figuratively, of those times to teach this moral sense, to ground students in the challenges and trade-offs and the choices that go into character and the ways in which thoughts become actions, become habits, become character, become destiny, right? We just announced this week, actually, a partnership with Facing History and Ourselves, made possible with our partnership with the Allstate Corporation, a new project called the Better Arguments Project. And I want to tell you a word about this because I think it also goes to this side of the equation about character. And it goes to a lot of what Martine was talking about as well in his remarks. So the premise of the Better Arguments Project is that, in the first place, we have to recognize, even in these hyperpolarized times, and even in these times where people are scared of getting engaged in politics, that because they're scared of the arguments that they will get into, whether online or in person, we have to recognize and face facts. And the fact is that America is an argument. So to practice citizenship is to argue. America is an argument between liberty and equality, between a Hamilton view of strong government and a Jefferson view of limited small government, between pluribus and unum, between color blindness and color consciousness, between freedom and security. Some of those very tensions that we saw Martine put up on the slide earlier when he was talking about some of these great choice points, are emblematic of these core tensions. And you can probably enumerate them, 5, 6, 7, 8 core tensions in American civic life. And the point in American civic life is, again, not for one side or the other to achieve final victory, but for us to be in a perpetual tug of war and a perpetual contest about these things. God help us if in the United States equality ever prevailed finally over liberty. God help us. They tried that in the Soviet Union. God help us as well if liberty were to prevail entirely over equality. Pick your anarchic society right now around the world. See how that works out. It's this balance, it's this hybrid, it's this combination, right? And so the essence of this project, the Better Arguments Project, is that we don't need fewer arguments in American civic life today. We just need less stupid ones. And again, so when I say we need less stupid ones, again, I don't mean to be glib. I mean we need arguments in our civic life right now that are grounded not only in the sense of history and the sense of the inheritances that we are all trustees of, the creedal arguments, these core tensions, but I also mean that we want arguments that respect the fact that citizenship is about power plus character. And that to be grown up as a citizen in this country right now is to be fluent in power, is to be grounded in character, and is to be capable of engaging one's neighbors, one's classmates, one's friends, one's family, one's adversaries, and oneself in these kinds of arguments with the kind of, what was your phrase, Martine? Impassionate impartiality. Passionate impartiality. That's our task right now. And so, as we spend the rest of the next couple of days together, and it's just if you spent time flipping through the program booklet, it's just an embarrassment of riches that this team has put together here. And as we are spending time with each other in workshops, in breakout sessions, on different professional and tactical pieces of this work, I want to urge and invite all of you to keep in mind this larger frame of the moment that we're in right now. Right? There's the apocryphal Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. I'm Chinese American. I never heard that in Mandarin. But I like the curse because we live in interesting times. And I think we have a choice to make. We have a very simple choice to make. And that is whether we're going to go along like this is just, another conference in a parade of conferences, another gathering in a parade of gatherings, another professional development association or, opportunity in a checklist of such professional development opportunities, or whether we're going to recognize that we who decided to show up here today, from every corner of this country, campuses large and small, states red and blue, people dealing with people from every possible socioeconomic and other kind of background, whether we right here are possibly enough to save the Republic. I actually think we are. I think we are. Because it's not just the 615 or whatever it is at last count that are filling this room here. Every single person in this room touches a greater network. Every person in this room touches a whole lattice work of sources and conduits of power. Every person in this room is a catalyst of a power structure of your own. And you may think, who, me? I'm not powerful. I'm just a, whatever your title is, or I'm just a student, or I'm just such and such, right? I invite you to look up at the screen. Our first task is actually to believe the title of my book. I mean it. It is to believe the title of that book. Not because in some la-la land, Pollyanna way that believing it makes it so and wishing it makes it so. No. Not necessarily. But I'll tell you what, not believing that absolutely becomes one of the most self-fulfilling things you could do. Not believing that you have power rapidly becomes a fact. And so if we look around this room and think about who's here, think about the incredible, massive mound of collective capital we have accumulated here today. Intellectual capital, relationship capital, moral capital, cultural capital, money capital, reputational capital. It is just a mound that's busting through the roof of this room. When you think about that mound and you visualize that mound of collective capital that we together, the 615 of us here, represent, we face this simple binary right now. Shall we hoard or shall we circulate? I think you showed up here because you want to circulate. And I think our task is to circulate in a way that becomes so contagious, so rapidly contagious, that we do begin, this hardy little minority right here, this group of people who decided to show up, that we begin to tip the scales of the culture in this country, that we begin to make more of our fellow Americans more literate in power, more conscious of character, more able and willing to participate full body and spirit in the life of our republic. And when we do that, then the 2018 gathering, and so on, scrolled up to 2046, like Stephanie was saying, those will all be great. And we'll all be looking back and saying, I remember when I was there in 2017 on that signal day, a day that's already going to be going down in history for other reasons. I remember when I was there and we looked at each other and we decided we're going to show up for a country, and we're going to show up for a community, and we're going to be great citizens. Thank you very much.